Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Alex Bell, host of To The Point. This week, Donald Trump has marked 100 days back in office. Over the next hour, we're looking at the changes his administration has made and its impact on California. From massive government cuts to policy shockwaves, political analysts are joining us to break down some of the big moves. So the president started his second term in January with a fury of executive orders. In just 100 days, he's issued more than 140, touching nearly every cornerstone of American life, from tariffs, education, and border security to energy policy, election law, and even showerhead water pressure, paper straws, and seafood regulations. Trump, alongside Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, have also overhauled how the federal government operates, shrinking the size of the federal workforce and cutting back on government spending. The president marked his 100 days with a rally in Michigan where he touted his administration's success. Trump says that he's looking forward to the rest of his term, and he also has some big plans. Take a listen.
In the coming weeks and months, we will pass the largest tax cuts in American history, and that will include no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime. It's called the One Big Beautiful Bill, and it will be the biggest bill ever passed in our country's history. It will include the biggest tax cuts, regulation cuts, military supremacy, and just about everything else. We will cut more than $1 trillion in wasteful and unnecessary spending.
The announcement comes as new polls show more Americans disapprove of how President Trump has handled his first 100 days back in office. The president has the lowest 100-day job approval rating of any president in the past 80 years. Christian Cordero has the details from Washington.
The cost of living was a major selling point on his return to the White House.
I will instruct my cabinet that I expect results within the first 100 days or much sooner than that.
As President Trump rounds out his first 100 days in office, a new ABC News Washington Post Ipsos poll shows the benchmark approval rating is the lowest of any president in the past 80 years. 55% say they disapprove of how Trump is handling his job so far. 72% think it's very or somewhat likely the president's economic policies will cause a recession. And 73% describe the economy as in bad shape, with more than half believing it's gotten worse since Trump took office. Trump's Treasury Secretary dismissing the numbers.
What I do know is that Americans are behaving very different than what the surveys say. So the surveys may say that, but consumers are still spending.
The poll comes as the global trade war intensifies because of Trump's sweeping tariffs, a decision the administration insists will be good for the American economy long term. The International Monetary Fund warns Trump's tariffs will drive prices up and slow economic growth down across the world. Our poll also shows Americans trust Trump to handle the nation's main problems over Democrats in Congress, 37 to 30%. 30% say they don't trust either. Christian Cordero, ABC News, Washington.
All right, so let's go ahead and bring in our political strategist now. First, I want to start with Roger Salazar. Roger, so good to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Our Democratic political strategist. Now, Roger, you've held several titles, including press secretary for Governor Gray Davis, deputy press secretary for Vice President Al Gore as well. And we also have Rob Stutzman joining us, our Republican political strategist. And you've also held several roles as well, including deputy chief of staff for communications to Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and also the communications director for the California Department of Justice and Attorney General's office. Thank you so much for being here. We have a lot of ground to cover. So first, of course, we want to jump into the approval ratings. We know that polling from Fox, ABC News, the New York Times, Pew Research Center, and other groups show that Trump's approval ratings are in decline right now. Roger, I'll start with you. What do you think Trump's current approval ratings tell us about his standing with the American public right now?
Well, I think what it tells you is that the American public is very confused about what this guy is trying to do. I know that his supporters like to tout him as, the guy who's the art of the deal, and he's deal making on all these tariffs, he's deal making on all these other issues, and he's trying to push the envelope as far as he can, and it's confusing to a lot of Americans. What they're still seeing is grocery prices going up. They're still seeing uncertainty in the market. A lot of folks took big hits with their retirement plans during the initial tariff announcements. So you have folks who are a little worried, and they're concerned and confused about what the heck this guy's trying to do.
Rob, what are your thoughts on his approval ratings right now?
Well, who he's lost is the middle, the independents. And independents that voted for Trump voted for him for one reason, and that was economics. Yeah, so to look, if you think about his majority that he had, winning the majority vote, he had one job to keep that coalition, and that was focused on the economy. And there has been, there's no parallel to how self-destructive he has been to the U.S. economy in these 100 days. It's without precedent, and I think voters are reeling. They're a bit stunned and trying to understand, as Roger said, what it is that he's trying to do.
Well, and Rob, I want to ask you, what issues do you think are most influencing Americans' opinions of Trump right now? Is it the economy? Is it tariffs, immigration? What do you think it is?
It's economy.
Without a doubt.
It's economy. There's a little bit of like too much too fast. There's a little bit of, hey, this looks incompetent a lot of the time. Not being able to do things the way you're supposed to do things. There's a little bit of, why we make an enemy out of Canada? What did they do to us?
Yeah.
You know, so it all kind of leads to this bewilderment. If he had focused on the border, which he's been very successful at, and slowly dipped into tariffs, explain to the American people what you're trying to do. Focus on China. But he comes out of the gate focusing on Mexico and Canada, essential to our supply chains and essential to manufacturing that takes place in the United States currently because of those supply chains. And I think it just has people's heads spinning.
Rob, I have one more question for you. Is Trump's support among Republican voters as strong as it appears, or are we seeing signs of erosion or even fatigue right now?
Well, you will see, you're going to have a MAGA base, right? Whatever that cultural red hat wearing 20% of the electorate is. But if things go poorly with inflation, or if we have shortages, if shelves are bare here in a few weeks, as some people are predicting that they may be, you will have some Republican voters or people that have moved into the Republican column because of him, because of the economic promises. They will start to become skeptical and could likely abandon him.
And we're already seeing it, Rob. You know, I was in Gilroy last week at a Walmart in Gilroy, which is farm country, and, you know, went in there and they had two giant sections where there's supposed to be eggs, just completely empty. So, you know, people are already seeing that kind of stuff.
Roger, what impact do you think Trump's social media presence is having right now on his approval?
You know,
and do you think it really matters?
No, it does matter. I mean, I think, you know, and it's one of those things where I hear from my family who are Trump supporters or friends who are Trump supporters. They're like, hey, we like what this guy's doing. We just wish he'd shut up. You know, and especially when it comes to a lot of these different social issues that are out there, you know, or social media issues that, again, he cannot help himself. He cannot help himself, you know, you know, his ego won't let him take any slight. You see it how he interacts with reporters and the media. You know, any question that he doesn't like is a dumb question. You're a dumb guy, et cetera. And I think that'll contribute to the fatigue that voters get.
What do you think about his social media presence? Is it effective?
Look, it's all that. That's all for the base. He's feeding the base, and I think the rest of the country gets weary with it when he's not doing the fundamental job well. If the economy's fine, they'll tolerate all that stuff from him. They're used to it. They'll bake it in. But when things aren't going well, or it's not clear what exactly we're doing, and he isn't delivering necessarily on all the promises that he has made, yes, those types of things I think just help try people's patience.
Now, I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, and that was tariffs. So I do want to talk about that because President Trump has reinstated and expanded tariffs on goods from China, as you mentioned, Mexico, Canada, and even some European allies. He says the goal is to protect American jobs and punish countries that, in his words, quote, take advantage of us. Economists warn that the price tag could hit American consumers. While some tariffs are currently paused, the impacts have already been felt across California. So according to the California Department of Food and Agriculture, California exports more than $20 billion in agricultural products every year. More than 20 agricultural groups in California have warned Congress that widespread tariffs could harm farmers and also increase food prices.
You know, the United States imports around 60% of its fresh fruit and 35% of its fresh vegetables. So if you talk about avocados, they're probably going to go up, you know, 45 cents each. Lemons, limes, bell peppers, tomatoes. There's a long list of products that are subject to high tariffs.
Experts warn that California-grown produce might become more expensive because of supply disruptions. In 2018, a similar situation with tariffs led to China imposing its own tariffs in response, which cost California farmers billions of dollars. Governor Gavin Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta filed a lawsuit in federal court asking a judge to declare President Trump's tariffs unlawful and void. ABC 10's Becca Habegger breaks down the lawsuit and also how Democrats and Republicans are responding.
Global markets rely on us to provide almonds, and we rely on their consumption.
Christine Gemberly is a Central Valley almond grower just south of Turlock. She says Trump's tariffs and the uncertainty they're causing will hurt her family business.
We rely on those same global markets to supply us with materials we need to build farm equipment, irrigation systems, and fertilize fields. Will we be able to access what we need to grow our crops? And if so, will we even be able to afford it?
California is the United States' top agricultural exporter and grows about 3/4 of the world's almonds. Tariffs on imports mean the goods produced in other countries, from clothing and cars to food, will become more expensive for California consumers. And countries that hit back on America's tariffs with additional tariffs of their own make exporting any product from California, like almonds, more expensive.
Almonds you see around us, export dependent. Pistachios, export dependent. Dairy, export dependent.
Governor Gavin Newsom and State Attorney General Rob Bonta joined Gemberly on her farm, saying imposing tariffs is the responsibility of Congress, not the president, through executive orders.
Where the hell is Congress? Where the hell is Speaker Johnson? Do your job.
Trump has had to resort to creating bogus national emergencies that defy reason.
Trump has said unfair trade deficits and policies with other countries constitute a threat to America, and therefore invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs. California's newly filed lawsuit says this is unlawful, that the act doesn't allow for a president to do that.
I'm not a big proponent of tariffs. But we do need to make sure that our goods and services can go to other countries without being tariffed. And if we want a true free market economy, I think Trump is doing exactly what's needed to help grow our economy and help grow our middle class in the United States.
Republican State Senator Tony Strickland says Trump's strategy is playing out, with dozens of international leaders coming to the bargaining table with Trump.
We have 75 countries that want to renegotiate their tariffs. I think this economy is going to explode. Give us a few months.
In a statement to ABC News, a White House spokesperson said instead of focusing on California's rampant crime, homelessness, and unaffordability, Gavin Newsom is spending his time trying to block President Trump's historic efforts to finally address the national emergency of our country's persistent goods trade deficits. In Sacramento County, Becca Habegger, ABC 10.
All right, so let's jump into tariffs. Big conversation. We know everyone from consumers to even small businesses are really, really concerned. So, Roger, let me ask you, are these tariffs a plan to likely energize Trump's base, or could they turn off moderate or even business-aligned Republicans?
Well, I think that's the goal. Look, there's no question. I think that people want something done about the trade imbalance that's out there, and I think that people from both parties can agree on that. What we're seeing here, though, especially with this announcement that Trump made at the beginning of April with this Liberation Day or whatever he called it, it ended up spiking the markets, spiking the Treasury bills, spiking all sorts of stuff, crashing the markets, this was an issue where, yes, we ought to be concerned about it, but it wasn't something that most voters were that deeply in tune with. But what they are in tune with is the impact that all of this own goal that I call it, that Trump has undergone over the last month, has had an impact on the economy, and that is something that people do recognize and are feeling.
Do you think tariffs have turned some people off, specifically moderates or business-aligned Republicans? What are you hearing?
I think it's turned the whole country off and confused them. And again, as we said earlier, there's no real good explanation as to what this does. If, in fact, they succeed in onshore manufacturing that they say needs to be here to create factory jobs, that whether we need those or not is debatable, prices are going to go up. The point of the tariff, whether you onshore the production or you're taxing what's coming into the country, escalates prices. And it's just, this is where my friend Tony Strickland, who we just saw there, talking about this, the economy is going to turn around. I think wildfire's coming. There's a fuse burning on that talking point. And I can't find an economist anywhere with any credibility that actually thinks that's where we are headed in the months ahead. Actually, quite the opposite. And that recession looms as a very real possibility.
And I also think that this, and again, I think between Rob and I, we've got, decades of experience in politics.
A couple.
And just a few
Not to
years.
age anyone.
just a few years. And I've never ever heard, hey, don't worry about it. Trust us. This is going to hurt for a little while, but it's going to be better. It's never been a winning talking point.
Well, it's a lot like what really turned off voters during the Biden administration was the lecturing that they would get from the Biden administration and from economists that the inflation really wasn't that bad, that they really weren't.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what they were experiencing. Yeah. If voters experience higher prices,
and they're seeing them,
or empty shelves, it doesn't matter what you explain.
You can't hide it.
Yeah. You can't hide it.
Yeah. So let me ask you, do you think that this was more aimed at rallying his base, or is there a broader vision here for these tariffs?
I think this is one of the, frankly, I think bizarre things he actually believes in ideologically is this kind of mercantilism trade policy that is antiquated. People didn't know what tariffs were. It's been 100 years. Smoot-Hawley was a question on an exam somewhere back in 11th grade, right? But it went poorly 100 years ago. And there's really not a case study for why this is a good idea.
I'm trying to find the book that he read that said that was a golden age, because that was not a golden age in this
Well, that's what I was
country.
going to ask you, because we know that he imposed tariffs back in 2019 during his first term. And according to the Brookings Institute, they said, look, it helps some workers, but it also hurts some workers. So do you think politically this was effective, even compared to, the first time that he did this?
Well, look, tariffs are a tool. If someone is using tariffs against the United States, presidents will use tariffs. Reagan used them, Clinton used them, Obama. So tariffs are a tool in the toolkit, but this is a massive imposition of tariffs, unlike anything we've seen in a century. And the base will go with him because it's his plan, but it's not as if a bunch of people wearing red hats at rallies really understand and feel passionately about tariffs.
Yeah, agreed.
How do you think Trump's tariff proposals will play with different voting blocs like blue-collar workers and suburban voters? Do you think it's kind of going back to when they see it and they feel it, they know it's there and it's going to be an issue?
Well, if they're going to, as long as they possibly can, and you heard it even yesterday, when you talk about the problems with the economy, they're going to continue as long as they can to try and blame it on the previous guy, right? That's Joe Biden's economy. It's not us. Well, again, starting with April with this tariff plan, the impacts that has had on the economy, that's all him. And as you continue to sort of feel the effects of that, voters are going to turn on him. I believe that.
UPS laid off 20,000 or announced laying off 20,000 employees yesterday. That's not on Biden. That's on the tariff Trump policies. It's going to be hard for him to hide from that. Port workers are going to start losing hours at the port of LA this week. We already know there's not as many ships coming from China and elsewhere. So, these impacts are really about to hit and be beyond just the loss in the Dow and the S&P.
The initial talking point, and I've heard it from Trump supporters and the MAGA folks, is, we should buy American if you don't want to do this. But again, I don't know that that a lot of folks sort of get, how interconnected we all are with everything, and how it's going to impact them personally. And when it does impact them personally, I think it's that you're going to see a little bit of squeamishness.
Well, and there's evidence in how they've actually backed off, because they have backed off on some auto tariffs, because it is so interconnected. Apple got an exemption.
So where does that leave, small businesses and stuff that are still, their products are sitting in China? Yeah.
Well, and what it does is again, like I said, I think there is a big problem with China. I think there's a big problem with intellectual theft, all sorts of things that we need to really fix. And when Trump does these things and backs off of them, what it tells China and their leaders, who don't really have to worry about public opinion, is all right. He can feel the pressure. He feels the heat, and will back off on things when needed. So that puts them in a better bargaining position than the guy who is the art of the deal.
And I do have one more quick question. A lot of people talk about we need manufacturing here. We need to be, buy America, make America.
Sure.
Is it possible for us to get to the level with what we're consuming, though? Is that possible for Americans to do?
Well, economists would say no. Look, trade deficits aren't necessarily a bad thing. It goes to the strength of the dollar. I have a trade deficit with my barber. Somehow we're losing because of trade deficits is just a economic falsehood. That's not reality.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I do want to talk about immigration, so we're going to take a quick break. But right after the break, we're going to deep dive into immigration. We know that there's been some new policies, challenges, and also the impact. That's coming up next. Welcome back. We are taking a closer look at President Trump's first 100 days back in office. A central part of his campaign and his presidency has been a crackdown on immigration. Border Czar Tom Homan gave an update on how many people were deported in the first 100 days, saying he's happy with the numbers.
Last number I got was 139,000 deportation. Am I happy with the number? Numbers are good. Especially if you look at the ICE numbers. The ICE arrest removals are far beyond Biden.
According to the Migration Policy Institute, enforcement has been quiet at the U.S.-Mexico border. They say encounters dropped dramatically in the first months under Trump, attributing it in part to ending the CPB One app, which allowed migrants to schedule appointments to arrive at a border port of entry. The administration has also been mainly focused on arresting and removing alleged criminals and undocumented immigrants. President Trump also reopened the notorious high-security Guantanamo Bay prison. The administration said it would use the detention center to hold tens of thousands of, quote, worst of the worst. It's unclear how many people have been sent there so far, but back in February, U.S. officials said at least 10 people who are suspected members of a Venezuelan gang were sent there. And the Trump administration is also taking aim at sanctuary cities. These are places that have policies that limit or define the extent to which local government will share information with federal immigration law officers. A federal judge recently barred the Trump administration from denying or conditioning the use of federal funds to sanctuary cities. It comes after several cities, including us here in Sacramento, sued the Trump administration. ABC's Roxana Leos has more about the lawsuit.
The city of Sacramento is joining other sanctuary cities in California and across the country in a lawsuit challenging President Donald Trump's threat to withhold federal funding. Sacramento Vice Mayor Karina Talamantes says the move is based on advice given by the city attorneys.
Every day we're getting constant attacks from the Trump administration. Every day we're getting new executive orders. And every day our city attorney's office has to work really hard to see how it's going to impact us and future funding or current funding that we have now.
On Inauguration Day, Trump issued an executive order directing authorities to cut funding for jurisdictions that limit their cooperation with federal immigration enforcement efforts. And following this order, Talamantes says a lot is at stake for the city of Sacramento.
We do have $175 million in pending reimbursements from the city of Sacramento from the federal government that we're waiting to collect. This is money that's, public works, crime prevention, terrorist prevention. There's a lot of active projects and, just programs that we currently have at the city that will be severely impacted by the Trump administration if it continues in this direction.
City Council member Eric Guerra says that's why they're fighting to receive the funding that was already appropriated by Congress.
So that we can continue to support the law enforcement efforts that the police department is using to go after human trafficking, to go after the drug issues that are affecting our city. And this is a short-sighted attempt by the Trump administration to circumvent the constitutional rights that are afforded to local cities.
In a statement, Mayor Kevin McCarty also said, "For 40 years, our city has been a safe haven for refugees fleeing hardship and persecution. It is the moral tradition of our nation and our city to protect immigrants and refugees. Sacramento will uphold this legacy." Talamantes says they're now being very cautious in every step they take forward.
We watch every executive order day by day. There's so much uncertainty. And so by joining this lawsuit, it helps us combine resources, knowledge, and experience. And I think that's an important first step in the protection of Sacramento's interest and programs and policies as we move forward.
All right, so let's jump into immigration. Rob, I'll start with you. Is Trump's tough on immigration stance hurting or helping his administration right now?
Well, I think it's his greatest success. I mean, this is what he's really delivered on. But it's like other things that are popular, like DOGE. The execution is questionable. And so here you
Meaning too much, too fast, too soon?
Or due process. Are we going to respect due process? How are we doing this? I don't know if Americans were into seeing professors here on visas being snatched up off the streets of of American cities. That's something that's a disturbing scene in America. But what voters really wanted was the border to be shut, which it clearly is. And we do want criminals deported. And they want a different posture on immigration. Now the tension will become, what's the public willing to tolerate in terms of demanding due process? And what will potential impacts be upon workforces if the enforcement goes too far?
Roger, what is your opinion on what's driving stricter immigration policies right now? Is it economics? Is it culture? Is it national security? What do you think is really driving this?
Well, it's all of those things, but it's also red meat for his base. I mean, that's what when he first ran for office, it was all about building the wall. And every chant at every rally was build that wall, build that wall. So there's a little bit of xenophobia in there as well. But all of those other concerns are valid, and I do think that when Trump talked about, hey, we're going to immediately deport the worst criminals, I don't think anybody has an issue with that. But the Trump administration's definition of what's the worst criminals, you ask the press secretary says, well, if they're here undocumented, that they're already a criminal, so that counts as the worst criminal. Now, again, I'm very much concerned about the due process issue because the whole mantra is like, look, we don't if they're criminals and they're undocumented. They don't need due process. Well, what if I get deported? And I'm an American citizen. I was born here.
I'll come for you.
Thank you. You can visit me in Mexico. But again, if there's no due process, how am I going to be able to prove that I am an American citizen, or anybody for that matter who might get picked up and say, look, hey, you made a mistake here. And this administration, because has shown that they are able to make mistakes, and they make them all the time. Elon Musk said, hey, we're going to screw up every once in a while. So if you've got an administration who admits they're moving so fast that they're going to make mistakes, you've got to be able to have a process for which to rectify those.
Do you think due process is really going to be the pin, whether left or right, that's really going to make people press pause on something like this?
It will be if it appears they may have already made some pretty bad mistakes. If there's a dramatic mistake like deporting a citizen, there's going to be a backlash. And it would seem, again, so far 100 days of track record, it would seem that's very plausible that could happen.
And it happened the first time that there were mass deportations. Now, the one thing we have not seen the mass deportations that he talked about. A lot of the stuff that was in that package earlier was optics. The plane down to Guantanamo, the pictures of Kristi Noem in front of the Salvadoran prison. All that stuff is optics. Again, that's red meat for the base. And look what we're doing. We're militarizing this whole effort. But we haven't seen the mass deportations that he said it was going to happen. We did see those in the last century, and American citizens got swept up in those. So that's got to be a concern.
I do want to talk about sanctuary cities. Obviously, Sacramento is a sanctuary city. What are the potential consequences of denying federal funding to sanctuary cities? What ripple effects do you think that could have?
Well, look, it's one of those situations where if that's what you want to do as a city, and again, then when you have a change of administration, there are going to be consequences to it. I think that's something that the Newsom administration, cities and counties have to factor in, as part of it, and that's again, that's going to be part of their deal if that's what they want to do. I don't think that it's right, but that they should lose federal funding over those things, but that's part of that deal.
Yeah, I think we had an election about sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, and the country spoke.
Yeah. Rob, let me ask you, considering the legal and political challenges, what is the likelihood that these immigration reforms will be sustained in the long term?
In terms of the enforcement that's taking place?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's likely. Look, it's really breathtaking how the Biden administration bungled the border. You look back to the previous Democrat administration under Obama, and they were excellent on border security. And, David Axelrod will talk about this was like job one, make sure we had a secure border. How Biden abandoned this mission and left himself and his party so exposed to this criticism, I think is just stunning. And if we have a Democrat president in the next term or the term after that or whenever it happens again, I think you'll see this type of border security continue. Hopefully, though, we start moving on to what we really need in this country, which is guest worker, migrant, immigrant worker programs so that workforce can be here legally and not told that they're illegal. The reason they're here illegally is because we haven't given them a legal means to be here.
All right, I do want to talk about federal worker cuts. We're going to take a short break. So coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about some of the cuts that have already been made, as well as the short-term and long-term effects, and also what does the future of public government service really look like? That's next. Welcome back in. We are taking a closer look at President Donald Trump's first 100 days back in office. Before his second term began, billionaire Elon Musk proposed a new federal agency, the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, designed to downsize the federal workforce. In just 100 days, President Trump and Musk have disrupted Washington, initiating a sweeping shakeup that's forced out tens of thousands of federal workers. It began with a massive buyout offer emailed to millions of federal employees, promising about 8 months' salary to anyone who resigned voluntarily. Despite facing legal pushback, the administration claims nearly 75,000 employees took the deal. DOGE also initiated mass terminations of probationary staff across key agencies, including Veteran Affairs, Agriculture, Defense, Energy, Interior, and Treasury. In February, the Trump administration also began eliminating more than 90% of the USAID's foreign aid contracts and $60 billion in overall assistance around the world. At least 2,000 workers and thousands of others were put on leave. In March, a judge ruled this likely violated the Constitution and blocked DOGE from making further cuts to the agency. Now, cuts from DOGE are also being felt in the greater Sacramento region. The National Weather Service Sacramento office says that it's undergoing staffing cuts and operation cutbacks as part of the federal government's cuts. The office says that it is now operating at critically reduced staffing levels. As part of the operational changes, staffing will be reduced every day between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., with the bulk of the forecast work being done during the day shift. This also means long-term watch, warning, and advisory products such as fire weather watches and winter storm warnings will primarily only be issued during the day shift. Now, young volunteers who help respond to natural disasters and assist local communities have been told by the Trump administration that they are no longer needed. They are part of AmeriCorps' National Civilian Community Corps, or NCCC. And as ABC 10's Jeannie Nguyen shows us, the cuts to this program will have impacts to the greater Sacramento region.
I joined after college when I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and it opened up so many doors and led me to continue a life in public service.
As a former staff member of the AmeriCorps National Civilian Community Corps, Griff Ryan Roberts says his time with NCCC had a profound impact on his life. The program allows people ages 18 through 26 to work with nonprofits and community organizations to help during natural disasters or volunteer in their local communities.
Working out along the American River Parkway. So the American River Parkway Foundation partnered with AmeriCorps and NCCC folks all the time. So they would be doing river cleanups, removing invasive species.
According to the Associated Press, this week, the Department of Government Efficiency notified volunteers they would no longer be needed. AmeriCorps' budget for the 2025 fiscal year shows the NCCC program was allotted nearly $42.5 million and will pay members $13 an hour.
This is not a very large agency, not a very large program. These members receive a living stipend.
Since 2015, the American Parkway Foundation has partnered with AmeriCorps to help clean the trails. The Parkway Foundation says AmeriCorps volunteers work with them once a year for 8 to 10 weeks at a time. With these cuts, the Parkway Foundation says there will be a notable impact for people who visit the trails.
Last year, in 2024, specifically with trails, we were able to clear 12 miles. And I think if we look back at those numbers, AmeriCorps was responsible for about 4 or 5 of those miles. And so without AmeriCorps, we're going to definitely have less of those miles done.
California Volunteers is a state commission that helps administer certain AmeriCorps programs. A spokesperson tells us the state hasn't received any guidance from AmeriCorps, but will remain committed to serving California. In Sacramento, Jeannie Nguyen, ABC 10.
California, along with other states, are now suing the Trump administration over recent cuts to AmeriCorps. The complaint argues that by canceling critical grants and gutting the AmeriCorps workforce, the Trump administration is effectively closing the National Volunteer Agency and ending states' abilities to support programs within their borders.
Trump and Elon Musk are attempting to cancel $400 million in grants, accounting for more than 40% of the agency's budget, and firing or putting on leave 85% of its workforce. effectively incapacitating an agency created and funded by Congress. The reality is Trump and Elon Musk don't have the right to gut AmeriCorps. They don't have the right to override Congress's decision to create and fund the agency.
In 2024 alone, more than 6,000 AmeriCorps members have served across California communities in schools, homeless shelters, health clinics, and other nonprofit organizations. So going back to our political analyst here, Roger, I'll start with you. What are the anticipated short-term and long-term effects of these layoffs on essential public services? You know, when we're looking at healthcare, education, and also Social Security.
Yeah, no, it's a, you know, there was an immediate impact that you heard from people who were calling Social Security offices and they couldn't get through to the offices right away. You know, I'm an outdoor. I do a lot of activities outdoors, and learned that you know that a lot of the services and many of the forest services, national forests and national parks were cut, and people couldn't get access to you know, to the areas they needed to because they didn't have the rangers out there. They've since backed down and sort of rescinded some of those, but again, that sort of just adds to the continual confusion that's happened under the Trump administration. People don't know exactly what they're getting out of their public services. They don't know if they're going to be able to rely on being able to call somebody when they need something, whether it's Social Security or even all the way down to a park service. They just don't know what they're going to get with this administration. That has an impact.
Rob, what are your thoughts?
Well,
long-term, short-term?
Doge could do some real good long-term good. Again, a good idea that is being questionably executed. So the one thing to lose the voters quickly on would be cut the essential services that they rely upon, or the part of government that people enjoy, like parks or outdoor services. But they also are finding botched computer systems, tons of inefficiencies. I mean, there's a lot of good that could come from this process. I'm not sure Elon Musk is the best face for it to have credibility going forward, whatever the heck that was with a chainsaw over his head and the glee that he takes in putting people out of work. I think most people would agree, most Americans would agree, you know, we probably could go with a reduced federal workforce, but why are we taking glee about people losing their jobs? So this is where they lose the narrative and the execution's poor, when there actually probably is a need and they could do a lot of good in terms of bringing efficiencies, particularly around applying artificial intelligence and modern IT systems.
And I think you see again, I think some of these agencies and departments have been you know, overbloated over time, and you see that this type of thing is in theory a good idea. You're seeing you know, a copycat situation happening here in California. Governor Newsom's got his own sort of program. It's not Doge exactly, but it's something similar. You know, where they want to do it you know, a little bit more slowly and look and try to find you know, any kind of you know, fraud or waste that's out there. So I think there's a desire to cut out waste, fraud, and abuse. It's just you got to do it the right way.
Rob, let me ask you, what are the potential political ramifications of these layoffs that the Trump administration is making?
Well, that you hurt certain constituencies. So if veterans can't get served, if seniors can't interact with Social Security offices, you know, if checks aren't issued on time,
people aren't getting the health care.
Yeah, this is where people will feel it and they'll be upset about it, because people resent government except for the part that they rely upon. And so that, you know, do that part well and don't interrupt that. And how that all shakes out, I think, remains to be seen. Look, getting rid of USAID, which I actually think is a bad idea from a policy perspective, voters aren't going to really care about that because USAID doesn't do anything directly for the American people.
Yeah.
So what they have to be careful here is not to screw up services to the American people.
Roger, let me ask you, how might these layoffs and the restructuring of federal agencies influence the future of public service employment and federal workers? What do you think it's doing, you know, to the agencies?
Well, I think it's disheartening for anybody who really wants to get involved in public service. And I know that the mantra from you know, from the Trump administration and the cabinet secretaries is like, hey, go get a job in the real world. Again, it's not like it's not like these folks are doing these jobs because they wanted to get wealthy. They're doing these jobs because they're steady. They're able to provide a service to folks and feel good about and feel good about being of service. And especially when you hear these stories about these volunteers that are out there. There was initial talk about cutbacks on firefighters that fight some of the forest fires out there, and they kind of rescinded those. And again, it's even impacting Elon Musk. It sounds to me like from all reports he's on his way out of there anyways. Because I think he's just bungled this whole thing. Made way too many mistakes along the way, and it does impact morale.
Rob, I got 30 seconds. I want to ask you a question. What lessons do you think can really be drawn from this initiative regarding the balance between government efficiency, but also preserving the essential functions of the federal workforce?
Move more slowly and effectively. I mean, you had a bunch of guys running in there and basically ripping out wires and trying to figure out what they did. They broke things and they had to start putting them back together. It should have been done through a much more deliberative process. Congress was on board, and I say Congress, I mean bipartisan. Members of Congress were on board with a deliberative process. And Congress has to act on a lot of this, by the way, which is what the state is suing about. It's not clear DOJ has authority to do some of the cuts they're doing. So this could have been done much more effectively.
And speaking of cuts, I do want to talk about education. In March, Trump signed an executive order calling for the dismantling of the U.S. Department of Education, advancing one of his campaign promises. President Trump says the order is about returning authority over education to the states. While the order does give powers to Education Secretary Linda McMahon to move forward with the steps to facilitate the closure of the department, it would take an act of Congress to completely close the department. The administration, with the help of DOJ, has also cut the department's staff nearly in half, canceled $881 million in research grants and data contracts. The fallout led to the closure of half of the education department's civil rights offices nationwide. President Trump has also threatened to cut billions in federal funding to colleges, and it stems from a few promises that he made on the campaign trail, such as cracking down on anti-Semitism on campus, dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and removing foreign students he says don't share American values. California and 18 other states sued the Trump administration, seeking to block the Department of Education from withholding money. And at the center of this dispute is an April directive from the Department of Education requiring states to reject what it calls illegal DEI practices or risk losing federal funding. Now, I do want to get into, of course, the Department of Education. Rob, I'll start with you first. What do some of these changes really indicate about the administration's vision for the future of education and higher education?
Well, when it comes to the Department of Education, this is actually one of the more traditional stances that Donald Trump has, traditional Republican stances. Ronald Reagan proposed getting rid of the Federal Department of Education. Look, schools are run by states. There are no federal schools in California, elementary schools or K-12. So what does it do? Well, it hands out money, and it hands out money with strings. And I think he ran on this. I think the American people would largely be fine eliminating this type of bureaucracy. Is there federal money that can still flow? That's up to Congress, up to policymakers. Doesn't have to be written from the Department of Education. So I think it goes to focusing on not so much federal control over something that states should have purview over, and that this would be policy that would really manifest that type of policy vision.
Roger, what are your thoughts on the vision for higher education?
Well, again, it also just shows you where the Trump administration's priorities are, and to me, that it's not in education. And I think it's going to have an impact all the way down from kindergarten kids who need who get federal funding for school lunch programs, all the way up to the research and grants at universities, which I think has an impact on us internationally in terms of we pride ourselves on being the leaders in research around the world, and I think sets this country back quite a bit. So I think that values-wise, it shows us that education isn't something that for this administration is really interested in pursuing.
Rob, what potential long-term impacts do you think that these policies are going to have on education equity across the U.S.?
Well, I think it can reform some of these universities. Again, I think we had an election about this. I don't think people were real happy about universities that could not contain demonstrations that were pro-Hamas on their campuses, for instance. You had presidents in major universities have to resign through all of this process. The DEI was on the ballot, and I think there is an election result on that. And so I do think there are some longer-term reforms to these private universities that take a lot of federal money that could be beneficial and healthy for them, even from an educational perspective going forward.
And I think that DEI, the buzzword, was on the ballot. Again, there's a reason that the Republicans don't say diversity, they don't say equity, they don't say inclusion when they talk about DEI, because they don't want to talk about those things individually as things that we ought to be seeking to striving for. And I do think that there have been situations in the past where we've needed to level the playing field a little bit. Whether it's the inclusiveness or getting rid of some of the previous practices that didn't allow for people to get to where they needed to be, whether it's in education or in the workforce. So I think there's still a little bit of a reckoning coming on that, and we'll see what it's like in future.
There could be, but the thing about DEI is that a lot of Americans feel like it excludes them, that it was dogmatic, that there was a fundamentalism to it. And it's really kind of an interesting moment in the recent American history that there was so much pressure on a lot of these issues culturally, and I think it helps to have some time to now breathe over it a little bit.
Yeah, and I do think, again, as with anything, there are ways in which you can do it better. There are ways in which you can achieve some of these goals in a much better fashion than what you had. And what I think what a lot of Republicans felt and a lot of Americans felt was they were getting hammered on, for not using the right terminology or not using the right words or whatever the case may be. There is a right way to do it, but it's still a worthy goal in my opinion.
Could this federal approach influence how education funding is really debated in California's legislature, especially with the projected state budget shortfall? Do you think that's going to impact it at all?
Well, it's going to impact it. So it's going to impact everything. I think we're seeing it right now in the legislative cycle and the legislative process. Whether it's as with everything else, there's a limited amount of money that's in the budget. Everybody's going to fight for their piece of it. Education has the largest piece in California, but if they're losing federal money, the education community is going to want to backfill that. But the health care community is going to want their parts backfilled. Veterans community is going to want their parts backfilled. Colleges and universities are going to want their parts backfilled. And there isn't going to be enough for everybody. So I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a very interesting budget session when it comes up in the next couple of months here.
Yeah, I think given the other priorities, including recovery in LA, is state policymakers should not be looking to the federal government to backfill education funding.
Yeah. No, and that's exactly what I'm saying. Is the state's going to have to backfill it, and again, that money's got to come from somewhere. So somebody else is going to lose out, and it's going to be a fight.
And last question before we go here: if these policies are upheld in court, do you see California leading a coalition of states and challenging or even circumventing them, similar to how they handled, other Trump-era rollbacks in the past, Rob?
Well, they may, but I don't know if this is the issue you want to fight on some of these DEI programs when it comes to higher ed. And when abolishing Department of Education is going to be done in Congress, so we'll see how our members of Congress vote on that. But I think there are more salient issues that California resistors will want to focus on than this.
And I think, again, it goes back to, are you really going to take away lunch money for kids, in schools? Are you going to? Those are the types of things that I think impact people.
But you could fund those programs, which help American farmers, by the way,
sure,
because that's who they buy the food from. But you could do that without there being a Soviet-style building with bureaucrats in it in Washington to do it.
Well, we'll see.
All right, I do want to take a pause right here.
There's a way, right?
I do want to pause right here because I think another big question that people have is what comes next. So that's what we're going to be talking about after the break. Where does the administration go from here? Are we going to see more executive orders? And what is the administration going to do next? That's coming up. With the bulk of Trump's historic second term still ahead of him, there are questions about what will come next. Some have even asked about whether he can run for a third term following his comments saying that he would try to. Megan Valeris verifies the constitutional questions and caveats at play for presidential terms.
President Donald Trump is making history as the first U.S. president since Grover Cleveland to serve non-consecutive terms. Could he also be the first since President Franklin Roosevelt to serve a third? In March, President Trump said he's not joking about a third term, claiming there are methods by which to do it. Let's verify. Our sources are the 22nd and 12th Amendments and Elon poll director Jason Husser. The answer is no constitutionally, with two possible caveats: succession and another amendment. The 22nd Amendment limits the presidency to no more than 2 total terms, plus a half term if the VP ascends into the presidency and later runs for office. What about vice versa?
Vice President Vance became president in 2028, and then President Trump became vice president, and then President Vance stepped down. That is an untested mechanism. The question on my mind is, could they get into that vice president role to begin with?
The 12th Amendment says no one ineligible for president can be vice president. Changing either amendment would require 2/3 majority in both the U.S. House and Senate and ratification by 3/4 of state legislatures.
While President Trump won handily throughout the election, he won nowhere close enough votes to have the level of support needed for a constitutional amendment. Never say never. If all of a sudden, President Trump invents the cure for cancer, then all of a sudden maybe people change their minds.
In the case of a succession amendment or both, it would be up to the Supreme Court to interpret what's legal. With your Verified, I'm Megan Malaris.
All right, with so much already happening in the first 100 days, I think the biggest question people have is what comes next. So, Rob, let me start with you. Do you think we're going to see more aggressive executive orders? If so, what kind do you think we'll see?
The executive orders really seem fairly wrung out at this point. You'll continue to see them, but a lot of them are press releases. It's to the point now where we need to start seeing the substance behind the executive orders, like releasing more water to farmers in California. Okay, well, how's that going to happen? So it's time for the administration to start doing some of that difficult work that a lot of Republican constituencies are counting on them to do. Beyond that, what lies ahead immediately, again, we go back to tariffs. And is he going to pull back? Are there going to be trade deals that he can tout as a success? And then what are going to be the real impacts on the economy?
So you're saying it's great he did the executive order, but now people are going to want to see the work that's being done.
Yeah, that's the easy.
To implement them.
That's the easy part. The easy part's giving the order. The hard part is actually steering government towards the solutions they're trying to achieve.
What I'm most concerned about is part of his, campaign stump speech and things that he talked about that is not really, that we haven't seen a great deal of. We've seen some of it already. Is really his revenge tour, right? And he's already talked about, using Pam Bondi and Kash Patel to go after some of his enemies. You're starting to see it with, their initial executive order on Act Blue, which is the Democratic fundraising, outlet, and calling for an investigation into operations like that and others of his political enemies. I don't see them stopping and pursuing an agenda that tries to limit the ability of Democrats to put up any kind of fight, and that's something that really concerns me.
Roger, do you see Trump's future plans energizing his base, or do you think that they could alienate moderates or even independents?
Again, his base is his base, so they're going to be there with him no matter what. He can, he famously said that I could shoot somebody in the middle of Times Square and my voters would still vote for me. And I think that still holds true for a lot of that MAGA base. The moderates are already getting turned off by him. Moderate Republicans are getting turned off by him. Swing voters, independent voters are getting turned off by him, and he still continues to be, the biggest driver of elections for Democrats. I mean, they just any Democrat worth their salt in this next election cycle is going to tie their opponent to Trump to try and drive turnout for themselves. So I do think that he's going to energize a base. It just may not be his.
Rob, are you going to say something?
Well, he's going to be, if he's not careful, he'll be only left with his base. And, I think it's plausible that his approval ratings, which are now in the 40s, descending to the high 30s, could be in the mid 30s here within a few months if things economically go the way most experts would be forecasting. If that happens, then the question for Republicans starts to be, well, if you're a member of the House of Representatives or you're in the U.S. Senate, are you starting to feel a little bit of breathing room to step back from being so closely tied to Trump? Because I can tell you, most Republicans in Congress do not believe in this tariff policy. They think it's bananas. They don't believe in a lot of what he's doing in foreign policy. They don't believe in making an enemy out of Canada. And so this is what I look to, is if his political equity declines into that mid-30 range on approval rating, do you finally see Republicans, more than just the few, start to push back for their own preservation.
And conversely, do you see if that situation arises, Trump and his administration and his senior staff get more desperate and start to push even harder on some of the limits that they've been pushing and continue to be? I worry about them getting extrajudicial on us and starting to act in ways that we've never seen any president act before.
Got about 1 minute left, so I know no one has a crystal ball, but how do you think this administration throughout the rest of the year is going to reshape the 2026 midterm elections? What do you think we're going to see?
I think the economy has been damaged already, even if he does reverse course. The Democrats have to be completely incompetent, I think, to not capitalize on that and capture the House. But the Democrats are pretty frickin' incompetent these days. And as unpopular as Trump is, the National Democrat Party has never been more unpopular than it is at this moment. Having said that, they should still be able to find a way out of this in the midterms, because it's always about the economy when it comes to voters. But boy, Democrats need to find something that appeals to Americans.
They do, and we do as Democrats. And again, like I said, right now our biggest turnout driver is going to be Donald Trump. I think, like I said, like Rob said, if you can't hang this stuff around him right now, you're not worth your salt as a Democratic candidate. That said, there has to be a shift, and also we've got to be, Democrats have to offer something, offer a vision for where they want to take this country, because they can't just that can't continue forever. You can use it in a cycle, but beyond that, if it's all you're relying upon, this is why you get Trump too. And if you're not careful, who knows what we get beyond.
Roger, Rob, as always, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys being here. And look, we know that we covered a lot of ground, but you can always catch to the points content on topics like these, speaking with our political guests. We love breaking down topics. So if you do have a question, you're interested in something, you already know what to do. You can reach out to me and the team at tothepoint@abc10.com. And if you missed any part of this show, you can also stream for free. Our app, ABC 10 Plus, is completely free to download straight to your TV. That's our show tonight. I'll see you later.